All right, let's get into it. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating, kind of mind-bending idea about something we all have to deal with: setbacks. We're looking at an essay that argues our absolute worst moments might actually be our best. So let's start with the big question at the heart of this whole thing. What if those moments that feel like a dead end are actually the starting line for a completely new and maybe even better journey? It's a pretty radical thought, so let's break it down. The author builds this whole idea around what you could call the paradox of misfortune. And yeah, it sounds like a total contradiction, but the point is that good and bad, well, they might not be as separate as we think. And boom, here it is, the main idea, laid out perfectly clear. The author Zhu Feng isn't saying that misfortune is fun or easy. Of course not. What he's arguing is that it's a catalyst. It's an event that forces a change, a sharp turn in the road. So the key idea here is that misfortune isn't the destination. It's just the signpost telling you a turn is coming up. You know, this idea isn't new. It actually has deep roots in an old Chinese saying. It's pronounced something like fu shi hua so yi, and it's basically like thinking of two sides of the same coin. A big win could have the seeds of a future problem hidden inside it, and a devastating loss, well, that might just hold the key to your next big success. It's all about the hidden potential in everything that happens. Now, this isn't just some abstract philosophy. The author builds his entire case on his own life experiences. Which brings us right to our next section, surviving to appreciate. And what a journey it was. This timeline gives us a quick roadmap of the so-called misfortunes we're about to dig into. We're starting with the Great Famine in his childhood and going all the way up to some huge life changes in the 2000s. And believe me, every single one of these moments was pivotal. So let's start with the first one. The famines back in the late 50s and early 60s. The misfortune here was brutal. We're talking near starvation, a truly awful thing to go through. But what was the blessing that came out of it? A deep, lifelong appreciation for the simple act of eating. The author came to believe that true happiness is just having enough food. That's a perspective you can only get from real hardship. This next story is a great example of how a really small thing can end up having massive consequences. So, back in 1980, the author was all set for a driving lesson, but another apprentice just completely hogged the car. Annoying, right? A minor misfortune. But then, that other guy drove like a maniac right near a crowd of their classmates. So, what was the blessing? By not getting his turn, our author avoided what could have been a horrific accident. A moment of frustration literally turned into a moment of protection. And this idea just gets bigger, especially when we start talking about career paths. That brings us to our next section, which has a pretty powerful title, The Freedom of Failure. Okay, so if you just glance at this, it looks like a clear ladder to success. Deputy party secretary at just 18, then on track to be a section chief, a school principal, a factory director. I mean, these were huge, prestigious positions he was lined up for. But here's the kicker. As he puts it, he messed them all up. And this just explains his point perfectly. The misfortune of failing to climb that ladder was, in his mind, the best luck he ever had. He's convinced that path would have led him straight to corruption and maybe even prison. So failing to get that version of success is actually what saved his integrity, his freedom. It's such a powerful way to reframe what failure even means. So if that career wasn't his path, what was? Well, this next section is all about how outside pressure and conflict basically shoved him in a totally new direction. This moment in 1994 was absolutely pivotal. So, the misfortune? He had a stable job, but his boss just unfairly rips into him for no reason. He'd had it. He quit right there on the spot. I mean, that's a huge, scary risk. But the blessing? It forced him to start his own company. That one single negative event was the direct catalyst for him to become financially independent, something that never would have happened if he just stayed put. And the turning points just kept coming, and they got even bigger. A really bad car accident over 20 years ago completely changed the course of his life and sent him down a spiritual path. And later, when his organization started facing serious pressure from the government in China, that misfortune is what ultimately led him to move to Canada, where he found a whole new kind of freedom and peace. Okay, so this brings us to the last, and honestly, the most radical piece of this entire philosophy. It's one thing to look back on your life and see the good and the bad. It's a whole other thing to embrace it as it's happening. Cherish the turning point. Get this. This is where it gets absolutely incredible. when the author started to lose sight in one of his eyes. His reaction wasn't sadness or fear. It was humor. He actually said, haha, from now on I can see everything at a glance. He just completely refused to see it as a loss, and instead, he reframed it as a brand new way of seeing the world. It just shows how deeply he lives and breathes this philosophy. And it's not just about physical challenges. When his work was officially condemned and called evil, he says he was delighted for a whole day. Why? Well, in his view, when darkness attacks light, it doesn't put the light out, it just proves how bright the light really is. So he saw that attack not as a failure, but as the ultimate confirmation that his work was important. So, as we wrap this up, this is really the core message, isn't it? It's a fundamental shift in how you see things. It's about looking at a setback not as the end of the chapter, but as that unexpected plot twist that kicks off an entirely new, and maybe even better, story. And that brings us right here to a final question for you. Because this whole philosophy isn't just about someone else's life. It's a tool that any of us can use. So I'll leave you with this. What setback, what failure, what so-called misfortune in your own life might just be a turning point in disguise, just waiting for you to see it in a whole new light?